Imagine like surviving this wildly violent hurricane. You're huddled in a sinking boat, bailing water, and you are just absolutely convinced you're going to drown.
Right. Just sheer panic.
Exactly. And then the storm completely vanishes, like in a split second. But instead of feeling relieved, you suddenly realize the person sitting next to you is infinitely more terrifying than the storm itself.
It's wild because it completely upends how we think about safety.
Mm.
I mean, you expect to be terrified of the chaos, but you don't expect to be terrified of the rescue.
Yeah, that paradox is really the engine driving our deep dive today. We are so glad you're joining us for this because we're unpacking a really specific, really fascinating set of source materials.
We really are.
We've got a transcript of a sermon by David Pawson alongside this accompanying outline document. And we're applying them to a piece of text that, well, it's deeply familiar if you know the Gospel of Mark.
Right. Specifically, we're looking at chapter 4, verse 35 through chapter 5, verse 43.
And what we're going to do in this deep dive is explore how this specific source material frames four major human crises. So we're talking about danger, demons, disease, and death.
That's a heavy list.
It is. And we'll unpack the central tension the sermon extracts from these events, which is this idea that when humanity hits its absolute limit, the mind can really only sustain one of two reactions, fear or faith.
Just to set the table for you as we dive into this, it's worth noting right up front that the source material makes some very strong theological claims about the identity of Jesus.
Oh, absolutely.
But whether you're approaching this deep dive, as a matter of personal religious devotion, or maybe you're viewing it through the lens of ancient history, or even just analyzing its literary structure, our goal here isn't to endorse a specific religious worldview.
Right, we're just here to impartially unpack the ideas.
Exactly. We're just looking at the narrative mechanics, the psychological insights, and, well, the underlying arguments that David Pawson is presenting in the text itself.
And the thematic hook the source uses to start this off is really interesting, because if you look at the first half of Mark chapter 4, it's entirely dominated by words.
Yeah, Jesus is basically just sitting in a boat, teaching the crowds using parables.
But the sermon transcript points out this sharp architectural pivot in the text right at verse 35. Like, the parables stop and the miracles begin.
A rapid move from words to works. And Pawson argues that just as the parables hid a deeper meaning for those paying attention, these physical miracles hide profound truths too, if you're willing to observe them.
Which is exactly what we're going to do. So let's start with the first crisis, which is danger. And, the geographical context here is actually super crucial because the disciples aren't novices.
Not at all.
They're professional fishermen. They know the Sea of Galilee backwards and forwards.
Yeah, and the Sea of Galilee is essentially this massive basin sitting about 700 feet below sea level.
Which is pretty low.
It is. And to the north, you have Mount Hermon, which is snow-capped. So the topography creates these deep ravines that act almost like natural funnels.
Okay, I can see where this is going.
Right. So when the freezing air rushes down those ravines and violently collides with the hot air rising off the valley floor, it creates this intense wind tunnel effect. I mean, a glassy lake can turn into a churning, deadly washing machine without any warning at all.
And the source emphasizes that the boat is literally swamping. I mean, these seasoned professionals are in an utter panic. Yet, amidst all this sheer chaos, Jesus is asleep in the stern.
Fast asleep.
And Pawson highlights this very specific detail from the text. He is sleeping on a hard wooden pillow.
Yeah, the inclusion of that detail is really fascinating because it serves a dual purpose in the source's argument.
How so?
Well, on a purely physical level, it underscores his humanity, right? He was simply, as Pawson says, dog-tired after a massive day of public speaking.
Makes sense.
But theologically, the source argues it illustrates the mind of a perfectly trustful person. The argument is that only someone with an unwavering, absolute trust could maintain the psychological peace required to sleep on hardwood, while a hurricane is literally attempting to drown them.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because imagine you're on a transatlantic flight, right?
Oh, boy.
And you hit a pocket of violent turbulence. The overhead bins pop open, luggage is flying everywhere, the plane is dropping thousands of feet, and people are screaming.
Terrifying.
Total nightmare. And you glance to the seat next to you, and the passenger is snoring peacefully. You wouldn't just be frightened by the plane, you would be deeply resentful of the person ignoring your shared impending doom.
You'd be furious.
Exactly. And that breeds resentment, which leads to the disciples waking him up and throwing this brutal accusation at him. "Teacher, don't you care that we're about to die?"
What's fascinating here is how Pawson breaks down the sequence of events into 3 distinct rebukes. The first rebuke is exactly what you just described, the disciples rebuking Jesus for his perceived apathy. But the second rebuke is Jesus rebuking the storm. And the third is Jesus rebuking the disciples.
Let's focus on that second rebuke for a second, because the linguistic detail the source points out completely changes the tone of the story. I mean, I think we often picture this moment as like a serene, majestic painting, Jesus gently raising his hands and whispering, "Peace, be still."
Right. But the original language is entirely devoid of that poetic gentleness.
Really?
Yeah, the Greek translates literally to be muzzled or be quiet. The sermon points out that it's the exact tone and phrasing you would use on a disobedient pet.
Oh, wow.
It's how you speak to a hyperactive puppy dog jumping up on your house guests. He addresses this deadly force of nature with sharp, commanding annoyance.
Like, down, boy.
Exactly. And the text claims the wind just ceased and there was a dead calm.
Which brings us to the third rebuke. Jesus turns to them and essentially asks, "Why are you terrified? Do you still have no faith?" And the psychological shift the source highlights here is profound.
Yeah, because their fear doesn't just evaporate.
No, it just re-anchors itself. They stop fearing the circumstances, the storm, and they become terrified of the man in the boat with them. They're like, "Who is this man that even the wind and the sea obey him?"
And the sermon argues that fear and faith cannot exist in the mind at the same time. They're mutually exclusive states. If you're terrified of the person who just saved you, you haven't transitioned into faith. You've just found a new object for your fear.
Right. The realization of his supernatural control actually terrifies them more than the drowning water did.
Exactly.
Well, from there, we transition immediately from conquering a chaotic storm in nature to confronting a chaotic storm inside a human being. They sail directly from the literal storm into a supernatural one.
Yeah, they cross the lake and land in the territory of the Gerasenes. And we really have to understand the cultural geography of where they just parked their boat.
Set the scene for us.
So they land in the Decapolis, Dica, meaning 10, Polis, meaning city. These are 10 Greek cities. For a Jewish audience listening to Mark's gospel, this is the epitome of the far country.
It's totally foreign territory.
Completely. It represents a thoroughly Hellenistic, non-Jewish, pagan lifestyle. And the greeting party they receive when they step off the boat is just horrific.
Yeah, the text describes this incredibly eerie scene. Night is falling. They're near these limestone burial caves, and a man emerges who is naked and violently cutting himself with stones.
And he has supernatural strength. The text mentions the locals had tried to bind him with iron chains, but he literally snapped them.
Which is terrifying. And Pawson emphasizes that the text does not frame this as a medical condition or mental illness.
No, it explicitly frames it as supernatural demonic possession. And then this bizarre negotiation takes place between Jesus and the demons.
Right. Jesus asks for a name, and the entity replies, "Legion."
Which indicates thousands of entities, a Roman military battalion. And they display this weird clairvoyance, instantly recognizing Jesus' authority. They beg not to be banished from the region.
So they ask to be sent into a massive local herd of pigs instead, like 2,000 pigs.
Yes. Jesus permits it, the pigs immediately rush off a cliff into the sea, and the demons are effectively destroyed along with their hosts.
Okay, so I have to push back on what happens next, because what does this all mean for the local townspeople? Their reaction completely defies basic human logic to me.
How so?
Well, the herdsmen run to the city, the people rush out to the caves, and they find this terrifying, violent local danger sitting there calmly, fully clothed, in his right mind. The neighborhood is finally safe, and their response is to beg Jesus to leave. They want him out of their zip code immediately. Why ask the man who just cured your biggest local threat to pack up and go? Is it just the economic devastation of losing 2,000 pigs?
The source argues it's actually a far deeper psychological defense mechanism. I mean, yes, losing the pigs is an absolute economic disaster. But more fundamentally, these people are terrified of the supernatural interrupting their controlled, predictable lives.
I see.
They preferred the predictable danger of a chained madman over the unpredictable absolute authority of Jesus. You could avoid a graveyard, but you cannot control a man who commands legions of demons with a single word.
That's a great point. And it reveals what Pawson calls the scale of values in this narrative. The text is making a radical claim about worth here.
Oh, absolutely.
The source argues that heaven's economy dictates that one single broken, outcast human soul is worth more than the economic output of 2,000 pigs. Jesus willingly bankrupts the local industry to restore one man's humanity.
And that raises an important question about the aftermath for that healed man.
Yeah.
Because the townspeople want Jesus gone, but the restored man begs to go with him. He wants to join the disciples and get out of there.
Which makes sense.
Totally. But Jesus denies his request. He tells him to go back home to his family and report what's been done for him. And Pawson draws this sharp pastoral application here, arguing that sometimes being a missionary in an exotic foreign land is actually much easier than returning to your own living room.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Going back to the family and coworkers who know all your flaws to explain how you've been transformed.
It's the hardest mission field imaginable. But the sermon notes that because the man obeyed, the next time Jesus visits this region, 4,000 people are waiting to hear him.
The seed was planted. But while the healed man stays behind, Jesus gets back in the boat and crosses back over the lake to Jewish territory, and he's immediately confronted with the ultimate human crisis, which is death.
Right. Jairus, a highly prominent local synagogue official, pushes through the massive crowds waiting on the shore. He abandons all his societal dignity to publicly kneel and beg Jesus to come save his 12-year-old daughter, who is literally at the point of death.
Time is absolutely of the essence. But on the way, there's a critical delay involving our third crisis, chronic disease.
Yes. The narrative architecture pauses the urgency of a dying child for an interruption.
And the desperation of this interruption cannot be overstated. We've got a woman who has suffered from severe hemorrhaging for 12 years, pushing her way through the crowd.
And Pawson notes the toll this took. She spent every penny she had on doctors and only gotten worse.
Right.
But beyond the physical suffering, the bleeding makes her religiously and socially unclean under Jewish law.
Right, she's forbidden from even being in this crowd. If she touches anyone, she defiles them. So she sneaks up behind Jesus, hoping to remain entirely anonymous, and just touches the tassel of his devout Jewish garment.
The physical transaction is instantaneous. The text records that she immediately felt her body healed and she loses her pain. But Jesus immediately perceives that power had gone out from him.
He loses power.
Right, so he stops dead in his tracks in this massive sea of people and demands, "Who touched my clothes?" And the disciples are baffled. They're like, "Look around. The crowd is physically crushing against you from every side."
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Pawson zeroes in on this vital distinction between crowding and touching.
It's a cue point.
Think about being in the mosh pit at a massive concert, right? You've got thousands of people physically smashing into the lead singer, shoulder to shoulder, crowding them, but only one person reaches out their hand and deliberately shakes the singer's hand.
Right. The physical proximity is the same, but the intent changes everything.
Exactly. Yet, if you look at the context here, stopping to investigate this intentional handshake seems incredibly irresponsible. Jairus' daughter is dying. Minutes matter. Why halt an urgent medical emergency just to ask, "Who touched me?"
If we connect this to the bigger picture of Pawson's theological framework, Jesus didn't stop because he was angry about losing power. And he certainly didn't view the woman as an inconvenience.
Why stop then?
He stopped to establish a relationship and force the truth out into the open. The woman was treating him almost like an impersonal, magical battery. Jesus stops to look her in the eye and call her daughter. He wants her to know that her faith made her well, not his clothing.
The sermon actually uses this moment to explain the theological concept of sacraments.
It does, yeah. Pawson points out there was absolutely no literal magic woven into the fabric of the cloak. He compares it to Christian sacraments, like communion, bread and wine, or baptismal water.
Yeah.
The source argues there's no inherent magic in ordinary tap water or a piece of bread. The physical object is completely ordinary. What matters is the active, desperate faith of the individual reaching through that physical object to connect with the divine. The woman's faith was the catalyst. The tassel was just the conduit.
It's such a beautiful moment of restoration for an outcast. But then you remember Jairus is forced to stand there and watch this lengthy interaction while his daughter's life slips away.
Yeah.
And the delay seemingly results in the ultimate human failure, death.
Messengers arrive from Jairus' house with just the most devastating news a parent can receive. They say, "Your daughter is dead. Why bother the teacher any longer?" The situation has officially passed the point of human intervention.
Time ran out. But Jesus overhears the messengers, and his response to Jairus is just fascinating. He says, "Don't be afraid, only believe."
He demands that Jairus hold the line on faith, even when staring into the absolute finality of death.
And when they finally arrive at the house, they walk into a literal wall of chaotic grief. Loud, wailing mourners. And the speaker shares a specific personal anecdote from the text here to illustrate this, doesn't he?
He does. Pawson recalls living in the crater district of Aden in Yemen and witnessing modern funerals there.
Right.
He notes that the sheer volume of the wailing starts within hours of death. It's designed to broadcast the tragedy to the entire neighborhood, making absolutely sure the whole world knows that death has won the day.
And Jesus walks right into this overwhelming broadcast of defeat, and he issues a command similar to what he told the storm on the lake. He basically tells them all to shut up. He says the girl is only sleeping.
And the professional mourners actually laugh at him in derision. But he removes them all from the house, takes the parents and his disciples into the bedroom, takes the dead girl by the hand, and speaks to her.
And the phrasing he uses is so deeply etched into the memories of the witnesses that Mark's gospel actually leaves it untranslated from the original Aramaic. He says, Talitha kumi, little girl, get up.
And she wakes up. The text says she immediately gets up and begins walking around. The parents are entirely beside themselves with shock.
It's a mind-bending miracle. But then, right after conquering death itself, Jesus gives an instruction that feels almost comically out of place to me.
Oh, the food.
Yeah. He tells them to give her something to eat. Think about how jarringly practical this is. It's like pulling someone from a burning building. You're both covered in soot, gasping for air, and the first thing you say is, hey, let's put the kettle on. Why does the text include this incredibly mundane detail?
Pawson provides a profound explanation for this. He argues it was a divine touch of immense consideration. While the girl may well have been hungry, the instruction was truly for the mother.
How so?
The mother's brain is basically short-circuiting. She is completely paralyzed by the sheer overwhelming reality of what just happened. By instructing her to go get some food, Jesus gives this shocked, bewildered mother a highly practical, familiar task.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Right. It grounds her. It brings her down to earth from her sheer amazement. It showcases this infinite power paired with intimate, practical tenderness.
That is amazing. And if we pull back to synthesize this entire deep dive, Pawson's sermon is building a highly cohesive argument. I mean, we started with the chaotic forces of nature in a sinking boat.
Then we move to the spiritual bondage in the caves.
Right. Then we paused for the chronic illness of the bleeding woman. And finally, we ended staring into the immovable wall of human mortality.
And the source explicitly argues that danger, demons, disease, and death are these four universal crises that remain stubbornly beyond human control. When we hit our absolute limits in these arenas, there's nothing left we can engineer or negotiate.
We're totally powerless.
Exactly. And Pawson's ultimate conclusion is that because Jesus demonstrated absolute command over all four nature, the spiritual realm, biology, and mortality, the text is claiming he was not just a great man, but God himself.
And according to the text, that leaves the reader with a stark binary choice. You will either react with deep, self-preserving fear, or you will react with desperate, reaching faith.
Just as a brief reminder, whether you approach this source from a place of religious devotion, historical curiosity, or literary analysis, the narrative architecture of these four miracles paints this truly fascinating picture of authority and human reaction.
It really does. It makes you ask yourself, what stands out to you what in the tension between these chaotic events and the characters' responses?
That's a lot to process.
It is. So to leave you with a final, provocative thought to chew on today, something building off the text but looking at it from a slightly different angle, let's reconsider the concept of the interruption.
I love this point.
When Jairus came to Jesus, time was his most precious commodity. From his perspective, the bleeding woman touching the cloak was a fatal, tragic interruption, a complete distraction from the mission.
But it wasn't.
No. If you look at the complete narrative arc, the interruption wasn't a distraction from the mission, it became the mission. It provided the ultimate crucible to test Jairus' faith and a profound moment of relational dignity for a woman who hadn't been touched in 12 years.
Oh, true.
So we want to leave you pondering this. What if the most profound moments of our own lives, the situations that require the absolute most faith, are hidden inside the exact interruptions we spend our days aggressively trying to avoid? We're so focused on surviving the storm and sticking to the schedule, we might just miss the miracle happening right there in the delay.
That completely changes how we view the obstacles in our path.
It really does.
Yeah.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. We'll catch you on the next one.